So 2022 was such a brilliant year in VCV land. So many new modules, so many new developers. Thank you all so much for making this software fun to use and being a part of this lovely community. I asked my Patreons if they have any modules they used a lot this year, modules they couldn't do without, modules they want to highlight. I will go through most of the modules they mentioned. It will be a longer video, but there are timestamp links in the description so you can skip around. Let's do this. So the first module is Spork from PathSet. I think of all the modules, Spork from PathSet has to be my favorite. Combine it with Vult Send and you can bring it in to taste. So Spork is a granular effect processor basically with different modes. Here I have a voice I can play. Right, it's going to Spork. It's going actually first to Send. Right from Vult, so I can bring in the wet amount. And this is the first mode, it's called Tines. Right, it sort of will repeat what's going on. We can change the grain size and the overlap. Right. Opalach, there's another mode. Stutter. Very cool. Then opalach, buzz. Another mode, repeat. Then we have skip. And we have scatter. The next module is Muxlicer from Befaco. Muxlicer for me, this says everything. Muxlicer is a sequential switch, Muxlicer is a sequencer, and everything in between. There are a few things I really like doing with Muxlicer. First of all is adding probability to the sequence length. So this is the original sequence that I have here. Right, and I have step number 7, the gate output of step number 7 going to chances, which will add probability to this gate. In hardware there is branches, there are all sorts of different probability skippers out there. Right, so if I use this now to reset the sequence, right, sometimes the sequence will be 8 steps long, sometimes it will be 7 steps long. Another thing I really like doing is injecting random sources into different steps, right? So here I have the random module from VCV. If I send this, for example, to the input of step number 4, yes, we can also inject external signals. I will have on step number 4, right, a random note. The next module is the Note Sequencer 16 from JW. JW modules NoteSeq 16 is my go-to when playing with new voices. Fast, easy way to get some random gate volt per octave when adjusting, creating a new sound. All you have to do is click this random button and you get a new pattern. Right, and then you can concentrate on the sound. If you don't like this one, you can randomize it again. You can change the amount of randomization. Right, I can change the length. And the NoteSeq 16 is even polyphonic. So in the right-click menu, I can choose, for example, 4 notes of polyphony. And now we have also chords. The next module is Dopamine from Vult. Vult Dopamine, my favorite generative module. You can definitely perform with it by moving the knobs manually, but to me the magic really happens when I connect Dopamine to Micromap and then ShapeMaster. This allows me to automate the Dopamine knobs via ShapeMaster, specifically the defects, offset and range knobs. I've also found with Dopamine that if you change the steps to 1, you can get some really frenetic driving sequences going back and forth from 1 to longer sequences as you change the defects knob creates some very cool sonic, sometimes melodic textures. So Dopamine from Vult, the neural tape sequencer, will remember what you like and what you don't like, which is quite cool. So here I have a voice with Blick from Vult, some modulation from Caudal. Right, I have for now the steps all the way down to 1, the defects all the way down. If I start bringing in the defects, we will get some different notes. Right, and now I'm using here Micromap from ShapeMaster to map the offset control, and I can use, for example, a sample and hold to change it. Right, and like this, get even more variation. The next one is steps from Alef Beats. I'm using steps by Alef Beats a lot, small, simple, and has CV-controlled randomize, which is a great way to keep the sounds moving. Also, having separate gate outputs for each step is a very useful feature for generative. So steps from Alef Beats is basically an 8-step sequencer, but again, it has a randomize CV input, right? And individual gate outputs that you can use for all sorts of different things. So here I have a sequence going. Every time it reaches step 7, there is a chance that either it will be randomized or it will be reset. So sometimes it will be an 8-step sequence, sometimes a 7-step sequence, and sometimes it will also change the steps, the notes basically. I also have the first gate output going through another chances to add more probability, which will then open the timbre control on the oscillator and will send it also to a delay. Right, so lots of movement, lots of variation with a simple sequence, a simple 8-step sequence. The next one is Dexter. Dexter by Valley for me. Again, short and precise. Such an interesting module. An FM synthesizer, an FM module with 4 operators, right? And we can also have here, we can also have chords. And also unison. And we have also detune here. You can take this. Make this a nice drone. Then I can bring in the second output. For each operator, there are also wavetables. The next one is Walk 2 from BogAudio. BogAudio's Walk 2 features in many of my generative patches, sometimes more than once. A drunk walk is one of my favorite modulation sources. So this is how it will look like. Walk 2 from BogAudio. Basically, we will have 2 outputs. one for the x-axis, one for the y-axis, right? And we will get voltage coming from there according to the movement of this little guy here, right? This is modulating two bandpass filters. We can change the rate individually. We can change the rate also for the Y, offset, right? Change the scaling. We also have a trigger input to add some rhythmic variation. Right, basically it will make this little dot jump. And we have also the distance output that will output another type of voltage. We can use this, for example, for pitch information. The next module is the scope. I only joined you guys halfway through this year, and for me the best module is the scope. You, Omri, use it really well as a teaching tool. I think this is one of the many advantages of VCVRack. You can always have a scope showing you what's going on, all of you beginners out there, and even advanced users. Using a scope is so very helpful. You can see if the signal is bipolar or unipolar, exactly how it moves. You can see the range if you want, the minimum, the maximum, the peak to peak, right? You can see everything that's going on. If I activate the trigger here, you will see it's even more stable. You can also create interesting and fun all sorts of shapes if you activate the 1x2 here, right? So that you can also create art like this, right? And if you start introducing FM and all sorts of different modulation, and it's getting a bit wonky, if you activate the trigger, you can also sync the scope to one of the signals and get something a bit more stable, a bit, I don't know, sometimes it's more stable, sometimes it's less stable, right? Something like this, and then you can really see what is going on, right? Which is also quite helpful. And this is a great tool, especially for beginners. Here we have 3 modules. First one is Zou Mai. For me, Zou Mai, despite the difficulties of writing it properly, Zou Mai from bidOO is a sequencer inspired by the electron sequencers with the trigs and the trig conditions and everything. Then we have Encore, also from bidOO. I use Encore quite often, probably too often. BogAudio sample and hold second place. So Encore is exactly the same sequencer as Zou Mai, just that it will work with a different clock multiplication. And we have here also the sample and hold from BogAudio that we will have a look at in a second. So again, Zou Mai is an electron-inspired sequencer. We have 8 tracks. It is a bit of work to program everything with the mouse. But here, for example, I have a sequence. Sometimes there will be extra notes, sometimes less notes. Right, so you can add lots of variation, probability, and all sorts of different things. Also, there are 2 CV inputs for each track that you can use. In this case, I'm using it for the sustain. Right, again, just to add some variation. And again, Encore is exactly the same sequencer. But here we have a clock multiplied by 32, so Encore will work with a multiplication of 32. Right, and this is because of this issue. So if you listen and have a look at Zou Mai, when I reset the clock, right? Have a look at the notes. Sometimes it will run quicker and it will not really reset to the first step. This is one of the issues with using this clock. But if you use a clock bigger multiplication, right now if I reset, this is now Encore. It will always reset to the first step. Right, so it will be much more stable. And then we have here the sample and hold from BogAudio, which has 2 channels of sample and hold, which is great. In the right-click menu, you can change the range, right, of the sample and hold, and it's a small module, which is always fun, right? So here I will use it to modulate, for example, the feedback. Another interesting thing, if I zoom in a bit, in the right-click menu, you can also add glide. So basically, if you have a look on the scope, you will see that the sample and hold will not be a stepped signal, but it will smoothly glide from one value to another. So this is also something that can be helpful to add changes that are not abrupt and smoothly transition between the values. Now we have Caudal from Vult. I find Caudal being a complete masterpiece for ambient patches. Simple, compact, super powerful. Just random voltages, yes, but it's much more than that. It's random voltages that correlate to each other. So Caudal from Vult will output smooth random voltages just like this, that are perfect for adding movement and variation to any patch. Right, here they are. It has 12 outputs, which in this case are modulating both blicks and also the filter tangents. I really like the recall function that you can use to create something a bit more repetitive. Right, so it will always go back to the same point where you saved it, and you can use also an external signal for this. Here we have ShapeMaster Pro from MindMeld. MindMeld ShapeMaster Pro, versatile and visual. As a beginner, it feels almost like having cheat codes for VCV. Indeed, it can do everything and anything you want. It has 8 channels, it's super visual. For example, here the first channel I'm using as a VCA. I'm sending the voice into the VCA input, and from the VCA output we will get it back to the mixer, and here you can change exactly the shape you want the volume to be in, right? And you can create any shape you want. Here in the second channel I have it as a CV source, so this will be the shape of the CV that will modulate the filter, and again it's synced to the clock. The third channel I'm using as a gate sequencer. You can also use it as a gate sequencer. In this case, it's driving a kick drum. Right, I have another channel for hi-hats. And again, you can create any shape you like. Then I have another one as an oscillator. This oscillates at audio rates. Right, and I have another one modulating the filter for this oscillator. Again, everything is synced. Here we have again a few modules. I can't say just one, but a category of modules. I could not live without the small utility modules like Count Modulus, Scaler, BogAudio's D-Gate, RGate, Sample and Hold, and Computer Scare's Soly, Pequencer. Not just for the joy it brings me whenever I see its name. These little guys make my patches what they are. I could not do much without them. So the Soly Pequencer, or the poly sequencer from Computer Scare, will basically take a polyphonic signal and will sequentially switch between the channels, the polyphonic channels. In this case, I'm using a chord coming from the Note Sequencer 16 that we had a look already before, right? So it will output a polyphonic signal, a chord, and the Soly Pequencer will sequentially switch between the notes, basically arpeggiating the chords. Right, and I have the combination of RGate and the sample and hold from BogAudio adding ratcheting with the clock multiplier of RGate. Here we have Rainbow. I would like to see some more created on Rainbow from Prism. I did one track on it, however, I feel I could use it more deep than that. So yes, there's a lot to explore with Rainbow. It's a series of resonant bandpass filters that you can tune, you can create chords with, you can create percussion with, and more and more. I actually want to highlight a different module from this collection, Droplet, which is one bandpass filter, resonant bandpass filter that you can ping. I'm just going to send a trigger to it. Right, then you can change the frequency, change the decay, right, and of course you can also sequence and modulate the decay, also the resonance. Right, and create all sorts of different interesting percussive, organic-like sounds. Here we have ReWin, only recently new to this, but most recently I've discovered the utility of the ReWin quantizer by Repelzen. I love the scenes feature. I've been using the scenes to basically fill them up with related 5-note scales and switch between them with some sort of modulation like sample and hold. It really brings some life to patches and sequences that could otherwise get monotonous or repetitive. Plus, having 4 separate inputs, outputs means that you can generally use only one to run your whole patch, or 2 for bigger patches with lots of voices. It's only a basic utility module, but I'm in love with this thing. So yes, ReWin, the quantizer from Repelzen, with the 4 inputs, with the scenes, with the root, with the octave. I have here 2 voices, one with the Pony VCO and one with the Sine VCO. Right, they are being quantized by ReWin. The sequence is coming from the Sec3, and I have a few scenes selected or a few scenes saved. Right, and I'm going to use a sample and hold to move between these scenes. And the sample and hold is getting a trigger or a gate from the first step output, right? So with each cycle, there's a chance we will get a different scene. Here we have Branes. How to pick just one, but Branes from the Geodesics is probably one of the most powerful sample and hold modules in VCV. This here is the module Branes Colliding Sample and Hold. Seriously deep module and super interesting. I highly recommend experimenting with it and having a look also in the manual, because you will need it, but still it's worth it. So Branes Sample and Hold module with all sorts of different modes. For example, here for the lower Branes, I have it set to the yellow mode. The yellow mode, I mean here the yellow mode, which means that now only one of the outputs that are connected, only one of them will actually change, right? So in this case, I'm using it for pitch information for 2 energy oscillators, which means that only one of them will change its pitch and not both together. Right, you can see this quite clearly on the quantizer. And here the upper Branes, I'm using the blue mode, which means that each of the outputs, the connected outputs, has probability if it will actually change or not. And this is modulating the timbre of the energy oscillators. Here we have Opuls. I really like the Vult's Opuls Retro FM operator. Very cool for sound explorations, for example, plucky and metallic sounds. So yes, indeed, Opuls is great for those FM inharmonic, metallic, percussive sounds. Not only, but also. So here I'm going to sequence it with Lepsus, also from Vult. And let's try to create a nice metallic percussive sound. I will bring in some FM. Maybe change the envelope to be more percussive. Right, and now in the right-click menu I can detune the operators, which will basically create something a bit more metallic. Oh yeah. Right, I can change the multiplication. What I really like about Opuls is the space, which is basically a sort of a reverb. Right, and we can also modulate this. So if I assign this modulation, I can use something like the Anima sequencer. Here we have another one from the Geodesics. This is Fate. Hard to pick one, but I've enjoyed using Fate in various ways to add unexpected events. Great for adding variations, for example, in sequences, but also to expand generative patches in broader ways. So Fate from the Geodesics, the event modifier, can add variation to almost anything, basically. Here I have a sequence. Right, and now I can tell Fate via the trigger input when I want the variation to happen. In this I will use the trigger, for this I will use the trigger output. I can choose, or I can say the probability of change with this knob here, the free wheel knob, and the range of change with the depth. Right, and we get some variation according to the probability, and there is also a trigger output that will output a trigger whenever a change happens. So I can say, for example, whenever there's a change, this will trigger an envelope that will send this voice to a delay. And that was it. Those were some of the highlights for my Patreon community. Thank you again all so much. Please consider supporting the developers. Most of them, if not all, are doing this as a hobby. In the right-click menu of many modules under the Info tab, you can find the Donate button. Some of them have also commercial collections that you can buy and support them, or just write them a message telling them how much you enjoy their modules. I'm sure they will be thrilled. Thank you again so much. I hope and wish that 2023 will be at least as productive. Cheers.